Boker Tov, and welcome once again to Soulful Psalms. We are coming into the last, I don't know, a third of the Psalms, and there's some interesting things going on I'd like to share with you. We're going to be talking about Psalm 109 for a unique psalm for certain. But before that, I need to allude to things like Psalm 105, 106, et cetera, et cetera. So there's two things going on in these Psalms. The first is that with Psalm 106, we transition to what is considered or marked as the fifth book of the Psalms. So this is the last of the five books of the Psalms, and you can see reflected in this material the fact that we are getting towards the very end of the process of biblical composition. And that brings us to the second issue, which is that these Psalms, Psalm 105, 106, etc., are both long and intertextual. Intertextual means that they make very explicit references back to other texts, earlier texts in the Bible. So that tells us that we are towards the end of the biblical gathering and somewhere in the process of canonization, because already there are earlier texts that the psalmist recognizes as canonical, as sacred, as divinely inspired, and makes references back to that. That has not been very common in the first 100 Psalms that we've looked at. As a general rule, these Psalms don't assume much, don't claim to know much about other biblical sources. But here we start to see it. And so this is a literature now that is appearing and is reflecting back whatever the psalmist already knows about biblical literature, biblical tradition, et cetera, et cetera. So, in particular, I want to call attention to so Psalm 5 and 6 are long psalms and they are historical psalms. That is to say, that in their own poetic way, they recount the events of the Exodus and the journey through the desert. They cite very specific events that we read about in the book Exodus, the book of Numbers, the book of Deuteronomy. So already these are considered canonical by the authors of the Psalms. And intertextuality alerts us to the fact that the authors know that there is such a thing as a Bible, something that hasn't necessarily appeared before then. So you can capture a moment in historical and literary development through all of this. And that also brings up another thing, which I probably have mentioned before, but you know what? Having done over, now 40 of these, I've probably forgotten how and where I exactly referred to it. But that is the importance of intertextuality in teaching us what's important, because, we all pick out that verse that feels like it speaks directly to our beliefs, our doctrines, whatever. We are talking about tens of thousands of verses, but some really stand out. For Jews, the Shema is, not Psalm. Deuteronomy 6:4 is just a absolutely essential idea that we need to revisit again and again. For Christians, it may be Isaiah 7:14. Behold, I have a young woman shall give birth, and et cetera, et cetera. So that is supposed to be predictive of the birth of Jesus, and that is a really critical verse for Christians. How do we get to what's important and what's not? That is usually demonstrated in Jewish sources, as my teachers would say, by those verses or those stories that have legs, by which they mean we repeat these ideas over and over again, all right, again and again and again. And by reiterating them, we emphasize to the readers, us, what is the outstanding issues? What are the outstanding moments, the seminal ideas of the Bible? You know, Judah going to Tamar, assuming she's a prostitute, is a really interesting story, but it really isn't definitive or essential to Jewish life. On the other hand, some things are. And the classic place I discuss this is the question of the creation story in Genesis 1, 2. Very powerful, very influential, positioned right at the beginning of the Torah. So it should make an impression on us. And yet, oddly enough, as far as Jews are concerned, as far as the Hebrew Bible is concerned, it's almost as if that text didn't exist. Once you get past Genesis 3, you will find very few and very vague references to things like the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, uh, the fall that the first couple go through. It's just not important. It's not important enough to bring up. Not the prophets, not the Psalms, not the other source materials. The story just dies in Genesis 3, and its influence is nil. On the other hand, what is incredibly influential in the Jewish imagination and the biblical imagination is the Exodus from Egypt. When we look at something like Psalm 105, Psalm 106, Psalms that we haven't even gotten to yet, they reference the Exodus. They reference the splitting of the Sea of Reeds. They reference the destruction of the Egyptian armies. They reference the plagues more than 80 times in biblical texts outside the first half of Exodus reference back to the Exodus. And from that, we learn one, the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden is not an important story for Jews or Judaism. The second thing we learn is the Exodus is absolutely essential to understanding ourselves and our faith. The Exodus defines who we are and what we value and what we take most seriously within the biblical tradition. So I'm sure, as I said, I've said that before, I'm going to say it again. The creation story has remarkably little influence on the way we think about Judaism or being a Jew. But the story that we were once slaves in the land of Egypt and now we are free defines us in a way few other biblical texts do. All right. So, having said all of that, and having now moved into the fifth book of the five books of the Psalms, we're going to talk about Psalm 109. Now, I said that this is a very unique psalm, and it is. And one of the reasons there are a few unique psalms that really stand out to us because they have something unusual to say, right? So we're very interested in Psalm 45 because it's not really a psalm about God, it's a psalm celebrating a king. Uh, it stands out in that regard. There aren't any other psalms that quite emphasize the royalty of ancient Israel without referencing the royalty of God. So that's pretty unique. The second one I always call attention to is Psalm 82, what I call the monotheistic psalm. That is where we see a kind of vignette in which monotheism replaces polytheism. It's explicit. It's spelled out for us in a very dramatic way in a narrative. And we really don't have other Psalms that quite describe that process. So that's unique. This one is unique too. And it is unique because it is a malediction. It is a curse psalm. It is directed against the people we don't like. And we don't have a lot of that in the Psalms, but we do have it here. Now, many of the Psalms will refer to our enemies and sometimes say, you're going to come and save me. You're going to rescue me from the jaws of my enemies. Sometimes the enemies are described as ravenous beasts that are about to feast upon our body, and God comes and rescues us. But this truly stands out. So let me give you a sense of it so that you understand why this psalm is different from all other psalms. Why is this psalm so different? Okay, so we're going to start out at 1 with the superscription for the leader of David, a psalm. It just says of David, or really to David, a psalm, a mizmor. That's all we got. All right. O God of my praise, do not keep aloof, for the wicked and the deceitful open their mouth against me. They speak to me with a lying tongue. They encircle me with words of hate. They attack me without cause. They answer my love with accusation, and I must stand judgment. They repay me with evil for good, with hatred for my love. All right. So we established the essential theme of the psalm. I am besieged by enemies who would do me ill. I don't deserve it. Uh, and therefore, something needs to be done about this. And God, I'm hoping that you're going to be the person to do it. All right. So then it goes on immediately into the voice of a curse. Appoint a wicked man over him. May an accuser stand at his right side. This refers to biblical judicial practices where you would be in court. If you were the defendant, the accuser against you would stand on your right side, and your counsel or advocate would stand on your left. All right. May he be tried and convicted. May he be judged and found guilty. A very nice parallelism in a curse. May his days be few. May another take over his office. May his children be orphans and his wife a widow. May his children wander from their hovels, begging in search of bread. May his creditors seize all his possessions, and his strangers plunder his wealth. May no one show him mercy. May none pity his orphans. May his posterity be cut off. May their names be blotted out from the next generation. O God, may God, ever mindful of his father's iniquity, and may the sin of his mother not be blotted out. All right. It goes on like this for many, many verses. And then it will revert somewhere around verse 21. Now you, O God, my Lord, act on my behalf as befits your name. Good and faithful are you. Save me, for I am poor and needy. All right. Well, there you go. You don't, we, especially in the modern world, do not imagine that religious sentiments include anger, retribution, the desire to curse our enemies. We like to think that we're above that. And in part, the Bible has taught us that. When you read Proverbs, it will say things, do not gloat over the fall of your enemy. There's a lot about forgiveness. There's a lot about acceptance. There's a lot about uh, tolerating uh, other people behaving in less than meritorious ways, but not here. And I think we have to reassess our imagination and realize that every once in a while, religious people want revenge. They want evildoers to be punished. And we may not embrace that sentiment, but our ancestors certainly did. They understood that sometimes, in order for me to be up, my enemies need to be down. And maybe the most satisfactory thing I can experience is their failure. So, uh, understand this with a certain appreciation for the full scope of the religious experience. That while we're told in Leviticus not to hold a grudge, sometimes we hold a grudge and we want to see payback. And that's a very human thing to do. It may not be what we ultimately considered the essence of being that God is the God of payback, but every once in a while you'll see that in our sources. Most famously, at the very end of Psalm 137, as the Israelites lament how badly they've been treated by the Babylonians and the Edomites who destroyed our city and burned our temple and carried us off into slavery. Psalm 137 ends with the sentiment, may their babies' heads be smashed against the rock. All right. Yeah, that's probably the ultimate of, religious hostility. And you don't have to embrace it. I don't have to embrace it. It's not what I wish for my enemies, as I like to put on the internet whenever responding to some heinous political act or something like that. I always write, I don't want him to die. I just want him to go away. And I think that's the best posture that we can have towards people that we consider to be relentless enemies of the good. But our ancestors thought differently, and this is an example of that. So, and just so that you know that no psalm is ever completely forgotten. The verses like "May his days be few, may he be removed from office," has been used multiple times against political enemies in America. Most notably, my attention was drawn to this on a bumper sticker for President Obama. It said, "Pray for President Obama. May his days in office be few," blah 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 blah. So our irony and snark is built into that, and that these verses have been used again and again about the fantasy that someone's political enemy, usually a Democrat, not always, will get their comeuppance. So just appreciate it's still part of our rhetorical landscape, and we each have to come to our own understanding and, if possible, appreciation of what this kind of psalm represents. Thank you all for listening in, and I will bring you what I hope to be a slightly more uplifting psalm in the very near future.